Hey guys, welcome in to 49 Reasons to Listen. I'm back again. I'm Juju Talk Sports. I'm joined, of course, today by...
How's it going, guys? Well, again here this week for a new episode.
All righty. Well, today's episode, so there's 49 reasons to listen, but the topic we're covering this week is interesting what-if scenario. So Project 11, the documentary regarding Alex Smith's road to recovery following the horrific leg injury he suffered with the Redskins, came out. And they mentioned the bad times in the Bay Area. So us as Niners fans, obviously we lived through it. We were there for the 2005 draft when Alex got selected over Aaron Rodgers, and then that's a what-if in its own right. But the second big question to Alex Smith's career is, what if he started the end of the 2012 season as opposed to Colin Kaepernick? Because it was kind of a unique situation when Kaepernick came in. Because at that point, the Niners were still rocking. They were 6-2. They were coming off a bye week in Week 10. And in the first quarter of that game against the Rams, Alex suffers a concussion. He's going down. Safety just hits him up top. And he actually stays in the game, funny enough. He actually throws a touchdown to Michael Crabtree, and it would go that would be his last pass of the entire season. But following that, it was entirely Colin Kaepernick's ship to run. The Niners would go 5-2 down the stretch. Kaepernick would lead them to a Super Bowl, of course, and then they would fall to the Baltimore Ravens. Following that, of course, Alex is traded off to Kansas City and has a pretty decent little career there. So off the bat, one question I was going to throw your way, Jose, does it seem like that Harbaugh just wanted to get Kaepernick in there regardless of anything? Because he didn't put up lights-out numbers necessarily in at least the first two games that Alex was hurt, and Alex could have been back by the Saints game in Week 12.
I wouldn't go as far as saying that he just wanted to have Colin Kaepernick in regardless. I think he saw the injury situation and he saw, okay, maybe let's keep Colin Kaepernick. Let's give Colin Kaepernick not just a chance, but let's see what he could do with this. Because if you kind of look at them side by side, they're not completely different guys. You know, they're both pretty mobile. Obviously, Colin Kaepernick is a lot more mobile. He's uses his legs a lot more. But I think as far as Jim Harbaugh wanting to go ahead and just, maybe just get off of Alex Smith as a whole and then just jumping straight to Colin Kaepernick, I don't think that was necessarily the case whenever Alex Smith went down. But I think as far as the season went on, especially the next couple games when Colin Kaepernick did step up and become the starter, I think he finally saw that, okay, maybe Colin Kaepernick, he could really give us an advantage with just his legs. With his legs in general, which we saw throughout the whole entire season and really his whole entire career with the Niners. He used his legs a lot, and it really did help the team. It helped him. So I think it was more of Jim Harbaugh finally realizing it's, okay, maybe with Colin Kaepernick and the way he uses his legs, and, he doesn't have a terrible arm either. He's still a really good quarterback. I think he kind of just realized, okay, let's just ride it out with Colin Kaepernick. He's probably our future quarterback. That's exactly what he was probably thinking at the time, that he was probably the future of the franchise anyway. But as far as saying okay, let's just get rid of Alex Smith right now, even with this concussion, I don't think that was necessarily the case.
Well, I mean, let's see. So that first game that Colin had, so they tied the Rams. So the end of the game when he came in for relief duty, it ended in a tie, 24-24. He did lead them on the game-tying drive to hit a field goal to tie it late. And then in the overtime period, he actually led them into field goal range to win the game. However, David Akers, who was having a bit of a rough year that year, missed the kick. So then Monday Night Football against the Bears. So this is the actual game that Alex has ruled out. Colin Kaepernick's day at the office, 16 for 23, 243 yards, and 2 touchdowns. They blow out the Bears 32-7. It was a dominant effort, though, on the defense's part, and I don't feel like we could underrate that because this is Aldon Smith having a field day. As much of a coming-out party as it was for Colin Kaepernick, Aldon Smith had 5 sacks in that game. He was just a monster that the Bears couldn't even stop no matter who was throwing the ball on the opposite side of them. From there, like I mentioned, so he went on a 5-2 run. They won big against Green Bay. Colin Kaepernick has a historic day running for 181 yards, 2 touchdowns. They beat the Falcons in the NFC Championship game and the Ravens game. Now, a unique trend, though, I did notice about each of those playoff games. The Niners started all those games behind. The Packers game and the divisional round, they start off behind because Colin Kaepernick's first pass was a pick six.
Yeah.
not the most
That's
ideal
right.
for your
That's
first playoff start.
For
And
playoff,
then
yeah,
in
for a
the
playoff debut, yeah.
and then in the Falcons game, they started off 17-0, back-to-back 3-and-out drives. But here's where I think the beauty of putting in Kaepernick was. So even though they fell behind with Kaepernick at the time, he always felt that you could come back. The offense was explosive enough that where no deficit was too large. However, in the Super Bowl, that was proven wrong because when you trail 28-6, it's kind of hard to come back from that one. All the credit in the world that they were able to get to the 6-yard line.
Mm-hmm.
And it's then became a point of, well, here's and a huge criticism of Colin Kaepernick's career. He had no touch. Everything was a line drive. Everything had to be like a fastball. And you look at those passes to Michael Crabtree at the end, not the most accurate throws. Maybe you could argue, what if Alex Smith is throwing that ball instead of Colin Kaepernick? Is that a Super Bowl? Is that the difference? Are they behind in that game to start? Because, again, one of the big reasons they were behind, Kaepernick threw a big pick in the middle of the field, the first ever interception in San Francisco quarterback's history in the Super Bowl. And, you know, it's tough. It's a tough question to ask because Alex, the previous year, they went from one of the worst teams in the league, or at least one of the most mediocre teams with Mike Singletary, to 13-3 in the NFC Championship game, and had Kyle Williams not muffed the punt in the fourth quarter. And there was a couple other things, but for the most part, Kyle Williams muffing the punt was the big outlier that caused them to trail. They might have been in the Super Bowl the previous year against the Patriots rather than the New York Giants. So, you know, I mean, what do you think would have happened if Alex closed out that season?
If Alex Smith would have closed out that season, man, it is really hard to tell. But I would like to think that it's not that much of a drop-off. It's not that much of a different season. You did mention those postseason performances, the divisional round against Green Bay and then against New Orleans.
Or the
you
Falcons,
did mention
Falcons.
But the Falcons, yeah, sorry, against the Falcons. They did fall behind. If that would have happened with Alex Smith, if Alex Smith would have gotten in a hole as well, I don't know because you were mentioning Colin Kaepernick was just an explosive guy. The offense was an explosive offense to begin with Michael Crabtree and Vernon Davis. Frank Gore was still in younger days as well. I don't necessarily think that they would be able to come back if they did fall in a hole with Alex Smith. But there's also the other point is, would they ever even fallen into that hole to begin with? Because Alex Smith, he was more of a conservative guy once he had time in the pocket. He's a lot more accurate than Colin Kaepernick. That's for sure. He's a lot more accurate. So maybe those early interceptions that really put Colin Kaepernick in a hole, maybe that doesn't happen with Alex Smith, and they just, kind of coast on through that postseason. And more importantly, in that Super Bowl, if they do end up getting to the Super Bowl, I think that one's a little bit more of a clear indicator that maybe with Alex Smith in the Super Bowl, things might have been a little bit different in the Super Bowl. But the postseason run itself in the divisional round and in the NFC Championship, I'm not too sure if I could just go ahead and say, okay, let's just plug in Alex Smith and everything runs its course. And then once we get to New Orleans in the Super Bowl, we go ahead and beat John Harbaugh and the Ravens. And they don't get in that big hole that it was really, really bad.
Yeah, it was
that first half. It was really, really bad. And even the start of the second half.
Yeah, because they start off the second half with that kickoff return.
The kickoff return. And maybe, they don't get into that big hole with Alex Smith, and then maybe that game is completely different. But for me to go ahead and just say, okay, let's plug in Alex Smith and the rest of the season it's going to run the way it did, it's kind of hard for me to say that.
How did you feel at the time when they made that move? Because they could have started Alex Smith against New Orleans, that Week 12 game. They ended up winning that one 31-21. And then from there, they just never really looked back. That would have been an ideal time. And let's face it, Alex Smith had a good track record against New Orleans the previous year.
With
his 2011, he has that legendary quarterback sweep that results in a touchdown. And some would argue you can call this play the catch three. So the Niners always had the catch, the Dwight Clark to Joe Montana, the T.O. one and T.O. And then I would say Vernon Davis to Alex Smith.
Vernon Davis.
That could have easily been considered the catch three. If they had
Oh,
won
yeah.
the Super Bowl that year, that catch would be looked back and played a lot more than it ended up being.
It is now. No, yeah, that was a huge play. The Vernon Post, I think that's what they actually called it. But yeah, that was huge.
So like I said, at the time, how did you feel about this move, that transition to not go back to Alex Smith?
I did not mind at all. I think mostly personally for me, I was always I actually watched a lot of Colin Kaepernick at Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever they actually drafted him, I was pretty excited, and I knew what he could do. I knew he was a super athletic guy, probably one of the faster quarterbacks in the league, definitely. So I wasn't upset. I also was a huge Alex Smith fan, especially like you just mentioned the year before, that postseason that he had the year before. I was also a huge Alex Smith fan. So for me, I wasn't really too divided because I knew Colin Kaepernick would be able to provide, especially with that offense that Jim Harbaugh had that year. It was explosive to begin with. And I think Colin Kaepernick, at the time, I was thinking Colin Kaepernick could just add another element to it, especially with his legs. So I was not too, upset that Alex Smith ended up getting a chance in 2012 after he came back, after he was going to be available to come back after the injury. Because I was just excited about Colin Kaepernick to begin with.
Okay. So, I mean, how it played out, obviously, is Alex gets traded to Kansas City. And you credit Andy Reid to adding a second level to his career. And Andy Reid's an awesome play caller, so that's very understandable. I mean, Harbaugh's great. Harbaugh's awesome, but he does wear on you, and he's never really, took in a quarterback talent and made them, I guess, what you would traditionally call elite. He definitely brought Alex Smith to the next level, but that's not kind of hard when you're coming off Mike Nolan and Mike Singletary.
Right.
And also Alex's other dysfunctions. I think he had 5 or 6 coordinators in his first 5 or 6 years. That's obviously a recipe to ruin any young quarterback's career. But over the next couple of years, here's how it would play out for them. So, of course, Kaepernick in 2013, he actually has them back in the NFC Championship game. The Niners, they ended up finishing 12-4 that year, just behind Seattle, who goes 13-3. So they end up having to go on the road for each of their games. Kind of funny, we're looking at this in 2019, 2020. You look at how important it is to win your division because going on the road, first in Green Bay, so we get to beat the Packers again. They beat them by a final score of 23-20, so a little closer of a game than it was the last time around. He runs for 98 yards, so still they can't contain him in the pocket. And then in Carolina, so this is Cam Newton's first playoff game as in his career. He only has 196 yards, a touchdown, has another rushing touchdown, but it's good enough. It's a great defensive effort. I mean, Patrick Willis, Bowman, they're just balling out. And then Seattle. And the Niners losing big games in Seattle, it's something, unfortunately, we've grown accustomed to, right?
Oh, yeah. Right.
They lose 17-23. Everyone will always, of course, remember the Malcolm Butler tips it up in the air. Richard Sherman picks it off. Why are you putting a trash-ass wide receiver like Crabtree against me? That's the story. 2 picks in that game. He does have 130 yards on the ground, though. So it still is a good effort, right? Not too many quarterbacks could necessarily do that, especially against Legion of Boom. Most of that's inflated by one big run he has in there. But still, it was part of the game. If a couple things go their way, let's say Bowman doesn't blow out his ACL on that interception, if Upati doesn't leave the game in the second quarter due to an injury himself, their rushing game might have had more oomph behind it to potentially close that game out so Seattle doesn't get back into it. But that's how that plays out for them. Alex Smith on the other side, what he's doing with the Chiefs, they're 11-5 when you compare the stats. So let's just go some box score hunting here. So 60.6% completion percentage for Alex Smith, 58.4 for Cap, 21 touchdowns for Cap, 23 for Alex, 7 interceptions for Alex, 8 for Cap. And then the quarterback rating, so give a slight advantage to Colin Kaepernick. He also, of course, has better rushing stats. These have the same amount of rushing touchdowns, but more yardage for Kaepernick. So, both quarterbacks, in that first year of both of them just starting for their respective teams, it's pretty even. Give or take a touchdown to interception, nothing too crazy. Alex, in his postseason run, the Chiefs were still rebuilding. They had once they hired Andy Reid, they had to get a few more pieces in there. They lost a heartbreaker of a game, 44-45 against the Colts, which was a fantastic game if you have offensive football. He throws for 378 yards, 4 touchdowns, has 57 yards on the ground himself. So, I mean, if he has the Niners defense behind him, you can argue, he might be doing a little bit better. He might have advanced a little bit in that one. And then here's where things start falling off the tracks here. 2014. And this is as far as we're going to take this comparison because it's unfair to judge Kaepernick post Harbaugh. I think once Harbaugh left and you bring in Chip Kelly, you bring in Tom Sula, it's hard to really give the guy flack for that. I mean, that's also when you saw the max exodus of players just departing or retiring from the Niners. Yeah. I think his best receiver was like the third best receiver on the Jets the previous year in 2015. But in 2014, back to this. So the Chiefs win one more game than the Niners. Niners finished 8-8. Alex Smith has a vast improvement in his completion percentage. He's now completing over 65% of his passes, throws for 3,265 yards, 18 touchdowns. And, here's one of the tough things for him. This was also the season the Chiefs had no wide receiver touchdowns. Kind of a unique stat that I don't think will ever be replicated. He only plays 15 games that year because he does miss one of the games with a lacerated spleen against the Chargers. I believe that was the season closed there. Kaepernick himself, so this is probably one of his best passing seasons. Throws for over 3,300 yards, 60.5% completion percentage, 19 touchdowns, 10 picks, runs for 639 yards, and he has 104 rushes this season. So you can definitely tell they upped up his QB options a little bit more. Though his yards per carry kind of went down. So it's kind of like, was it shocking people? What did people catch on to it? What is kind of those things that always happens to these more mobile quarterbacks down the line?
Right.
So in that span between these two players, knowing their stats and everything, here I'm going to present two questions your way. One, would you have taken having Alex Smith? Would you take what the Chiefs did with Alex Smith? 4 out of 5, 4 or 5 years there in the playoffs, or Colin Kaepernick, what happened with the Niners, where everything, again, progressively went downhill, but you did say we went to the Super Bowl, we went to an NFC championship game, now we're back in Super Bowl contention. Where would you kind of like, if you had to choose one, where are you kind of diverging? What are you picking?
I think I'll go still with that Super Bowl run. I'll still take the Super Bowl run, even though the years after that, well, not including 2013 because they still made it to NFC Championship game. The Niners did. But then, after that, the Chiefs still continued to make it to the postseason. And then that's when the Niners kind of fell off and started going into rebuilding mode. But I still, that 2012 season, having that postseason run leading all the way up to the Super Bowl. And even though we mentioned how they were getting blown out at first, they were still just a touchdown pass away from winning the whole thing. So I think I would still take that over, the future years coming and having just those postseason appearances where the Chiefs, before Patrick Mahomes were just a one and done type team in the playoffs anyway. So yeah, give me that Super Bowl run. Give me that Super Bowl
NFC Championship game run.
And even the NFC Championship game. That one was rough. That was really, really rough to get Richard Sherman, which oddly enough, now he's pretty much the leader in our defense now. But even getting that, I'll still take that. I'll still take that NFC Championship appearance. I'll take the Super Bowl appearance from the year before. I'll take that over what the Chiefs were able to do, which, credit to them as well. They were able to, use, like you mentioned, Andy Reid was probably huge. That was probably one of the best decisions that franchise has made in a really long time. It took him a while for them for it to pay off, but what Alex Smith was doing was great there. Those few years that he was there and the postseason runs that he was able to, he got into the postseason, but I would still take the Super Bowl appearances and the NFC Championship appearance 100%.
Are they a Super Bowl champion with Alex Smith? Like any of those years?
Who, the Niners?
Yeah.
No.
No? You still think that we're over during that time?
Yeah, I still think we're over because even that Super Bowl, when they did get to the Super Bowl against the Ravens, I don't know. I don't think Alex Smith would have been that much of a difference. And then, of course, the next year, that Seattle defense, probably one of the best secondaries of all time. I just don't think Alex Smith would have been just that much of a difference.
I do think that being Alex Smith was more risk aversive. It could have potentially played out a little bit different in that Seattle game because, taking the deep shot to Michael Crabtree in the end zone, you could argue that was unnecessary. at that time,
Right.
because they still had about 30 seconds on the clock, two timeouts. There was still time to move the ball down the field rather than taking that shot that they did. And obviously it didn't pay off. I don't bemoan Harbaugh for trying to capture the lightning in the bottle that he did. You know, at the end of the day, Kaepernick had a vast ceiling. He had untapped potential. Alex Smith was always going to have the highest floor of the two. Like Alex Smith's baseline, Alex Smith's worst day is still better than a middle of the pack day for Kaepernick.
Right.
But the fact that, again, you just looked at Kaepernick's opportunity, the potential, if he completes one of those passes, Michael Crabtree, the way we talked about it is completely different. Of course, 2011, again, if Kyle Williams doesn't muff that punt, we're talking about things a little bit different as well. Right. So with that said, the main question, would they have won it? I'm going to also say no. I'm going to also say that, unfortunately, we still, quest for 6 continues, and it continues all the way up to 2020. It would have been interesting to see what it would have done with Harbaugh's career, what it would have done with the eventual hirings. Yeah. Could we have lost out on Kyle Shanahan? It's funny how history works out, but, you know, playing out a what-if scenario is kind of therapeutic, because I think that's what we do as fans. When you're just sitting there drunk in a bar, it's like you have these conversations all the time, right? Like,
right.
What if this didn't happen? What if that didn't happen? Maybe we'll get around to that Aaron Rodgers, Alex Smith one. I think it's been done to death. This one hasn't necessarily been talked about as much.
Right.
All right, guys. Well, we hope you enjoyed that video. Like, comment, and subscribe for more great Niners comments. Check out our social medias. Check out at 49 Reasons to Listen. So that's the number 2 listen. Twitter, Instagram, tons of great places. All our social media accounts are listed underneath us here in this meeting here. So check those out. And we'll be back with another great episode next week. Shoot us your questions your way if you're interested in, talking some stuff out. Bye.
See you guys.